My husband suddenly fainted. The words uttered by my eldest son's wife, who appeared in the hospital room, were shocking.
Now I'll get the old man's inheritance.
I was stunned and my face turned pale. The next moment, my husband stirred and rose from his bed.
So it was the inheritance you were after.
As he said this, her face turned white, her eyes wide with surprise. My name is Sarah. I'm a stay-at-home wife about to turn 60, and my husband named James has his own law firm. He's a well-known lawyer and is always busy with lots of cases. We have 2 sons. The eldest is Liam, the youngest is Ethan. Ethan followed his father's footsteps and became a lawyer. But Liam, despite being over 30, never works and is always lounging around at home. Ethan is married and his wife's name is Lily. They live together with their 1-year-old daughter. We thought Liam would feel rushed seeing his younger brother get married and have a child first, but he didn't seem to care at all. Maybe Liam will stay like this forever. Just when we were giving up hope, Liam recently brought home a fiancée. She introduced herself as Emily. She was a young woman of 25, and she had a beautiful face. When James and I asked where they met, they said they met on a dating app. Typical for young people. To be honest, James and I couldn't trust Emily. She was visiting her future husband's family for the first time, and yet she came in a short, brightly colored skirt. I would think it's more appropriate to dress conservatively for your first meeting with your fiancé's family. Her clothing wasn't the only issue. She was smoking during the greeting. She had pristine hands that probably never did any housework, and her nails were excessively long, adorned with flashy decorations. We were so taken aback by her appearance that we were at a loss for words. But we don't really understand what young people are thinking these days. If we were to point out anything unusual, it could lead to a complicated relationship. Besides, you can't judge a book by its cover. Given that our son liked her, we figured there must be something endearing about her. As she sat across from James and me in the living room, she took a sweeping look around the house and immediately burst into a smile.
The furniture and interiors are very fancy, as I heard. What kind of work do you do, sir?
Her polite language was unexpected, and James and I realized we shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But as the conversation progressed, storm clouds started to gather.
I'd love to live here someday.
Excuse me?
I mean, moving in together. You both are getting older? Aren't you worried living alone?
James and I found her words to be well-intentioned, but the truth was we had no intention of living with anyone else. Because when I was young, my mother-in-law and I had had a falling out when I married James. I was done with that kind of trouble. So I told her straightforwardly we had no plans to live together. She seemed a bit disgruntled, but carried on the conversation with a smile.
So, sir, how much do you make?
Why do you ask?
I heard you're a respectable lawyer, so I'm just curious. Would love to know about a lawyer's wealth and assets.
As Emily leaned in to talk more about money, James vaguely answered her questions without revealing too much. She was starting to seem a bit odd. What on earth did our son see in her? I wanted to ask him, but Emily was firing questions so rapidly it felt like an investigation. We both felt uncomfortable, and as soon as she left, James voiced his complaints.
Why is she asking so much about money, even before you're married? Shouldn't you have said something? What is she thinking?
Despite James's anger, Liam remained nonchalant.
So what? When you guys are gone, I'll have to know this stuff anyway.
Such a casual response only enraged James more. In time, Liam and Emily got married. Initially, he moved into Emily's house. A few months into their marriage, James's father, who was living in a senior home, passed away. We invited Emily and Liam to the funeral, but Emily didn't have a simple and modest dress appropriate for a funeral. She came in a black, glittery, form-fitting dress. Stunned, I hurriedly asked her, "Don't you have something more modest to wear? That's not really suitable for a funeral."
Excuse me? Is it not okay? This is the most simple dress I own. It's glittery. If you didn't have anything suitable, you could have borrowed something from Lily, Ethan's wife. Why didn't you say something?
Isn't her style a bit frumpy?
Sorry?
It's all black, too plain, and the length is all wrong for me.
Emily pouted as she spoke.
I was completely lost for words at her attitude. She put up a bit of a fight, but in the end, we had her change into one of Lily's dresses. But not before Emily made a snide comment.
What the heck? This is too big. and it keeps slipping off. Size 8, maybe you should consider losing some weight.
In response to those words, Lily was visibly furious. To make matters worse, Emily had spilled her coffee on Lily's dress, staining it. Yet Emily didn't look remorseful at all, but grinned instead. Lily, clearly irritated, confronted her with a stern look.
I'll be asking you for the dry cleaning costs.
What? It was just a little accident. You can just throw it in the washer, and it'll be as good as new, right?
This dress was expensive, and what if the coffee stain doesn't come out in the wash?
I do care. You're my sister-in-law, right? Don't talk to me like you're better than me. Besides, your husband's a lawyer, isn't he? He makes good money, doesn't he? So don't act like a cheapskate.
That's not the point. You're being unbelievably rude.
She tried to grab Lily in her anger, but I quickly stepped in. In the end, James and I offered to bear the dry cleaning costs. Lily suggested that Emily should pay, but I was the one who had initially offered to lend the dress. Plus, I was sure Emily would never willingly offer to pay. However, our misfortune was far from over. One day I remembered something I forgot to buy, excused myself to James, and rushed to the store. When I returned home, it was eerily quiet. Usually, James would be watching TV with a beer in his hand, laughing loudly, but I didn't hear any of that. Feeling puzzled, I went to the living room, and there he was, crouching on the floor, clutching his stomach. There was a beer and remote control on the floor nearby, likely taken out of the fridge. I was in a panic, but I managed to call an ambulance. I called out to James repeatedly while waiting for the ambulance, but his responses were faint. He was taken to a nearby major hospital in the ambulance. That's when he was admitted.
James fainted. It's serious. He might not make it.
As I waited for James, I called Liam in a shaky, distressed voice. They promised they would come to the hospital immediately. I cried by his side as he slept in his hospital bed after the examination. Then, Liam entered the hospital room at the same time.
Dad, are you okay?
Ethan said this, rushed forward in a panic, tears streaming down his face as he held James's hand. But James didn't open his eyes. Lily, tears in her eyes, watched James silently next to Ethan. In contrast, Liam and Emily stood there, grinning. Then Emily said something shocking.
Now I can have the old man's inheritance.
I was stunned to hear those words. In place of my shocked silence, Ethan and Lily yelled at her.
That's disrespectful. Why on earth did you bring someone like her, Liam?
Absolutely. How can you say something like that? It's unbelievable.
Emily, however, laughed scornfully and retorted.
I'm the wife of the eldest son in this family, right? Besides, unless he dies, I can't get the inheritance, can I? Right, Liam?
That's right. If Dad doesn't die, I have to work, and I can't go back to our house. Mom, you can keep Ethan and the rest at your house. Then that house will be ours.
Oh dear, I wish he would just hurry up and die.
I believe my face turned pale at their terrible remarks. Ethan and Lily were glaring with sharp eyes at them, but they didn't seem to care. With a smug grin on their faces, they were about to leave the hospital room. Suddenly, James, who had been lying in the hospital bed all this time, stirred.
So you were after the inheritance after all.
Hearing these words, the couple's eyes widened in shock, their faces turning pale. Emily, struck dumb, hit her back against the hospital room door, her mouth agape.
Why are you? How are you alive?
Emily shrieked, pointing at James in the bed.
You should be dead.
As she leaned against the door, he shot a stern look at her.
There's no way you would get a single penny of the inheritance. You should have thought before you spoke.
Emily was taken aback, but Liam stepped forward to defend her.
Weren't you supposed to be on your deathbed? Did you lie to us?
James chuckled, looking at me.
Sarah does tend to exaggerate. I told him I was worried about you.
The tears just wouldn't stop.
It's just a stomach ulcer. I'm not dying. Just overworked myself a bit.
Upon hearing his words, the couple stood there, dumbfounded.
Stomach ulcer? What?
Liam began.
Mom called us crying, and we thought...
What is happening?
Emily exclaimed.
Liam told me you were critically ill.
Emily was in a panic. Meanwhile, Liam was stumbling over his words. Apparently, he had led her to believe that his father was on his deathbed. It was clearly a miscommunication on Liam's part, but Emily, for reasons known only to her, began to glare at me.
Stop exaggerating things, ma'am. It's just a stomach ulcer. Hand over the inheritance already.
Emily started hurling abusive words. Liam stood by her, visibly nervous and uncomfortable. James sighed, fed up with their behavior. Emily's barrage of insults continued for a while until Ethan and Lily couldn't bear it anymore and intervened.
You've been on about this inheritance, but are you sure you've got your facts straight?
I'm the wife of the eldest son. I have the right to receive it.
Emily retorted.
Even if our father were to pass away, the inheritance would go to our mother first, and then be distributed among my brother and me. You haven't taken care of our father, and legal heirs are always prioritized.
No way. What belongs to Liam also belongs to me. Isn't that right, Liam?
Emily cornered Liam, who reluctantly said, "That's right," who reluctantly nodded in agreement. I felt sorry for my son, who had been deceived by a woman like Emily, no matter her intentions.
I have an ace up my sleeve. Look at this.
Emily pulled out a document from her bag. It was a will.
Liam found it. It states that all the inheritance goes to Liam. I'm sure my father-in-law was being thoughtful, knowing Liam needed it more than his successful lawyer brother.
She wore a self-satisfied look, although James just shook his head.
I didn't write such a thing. It must be a fake. I have entrusted the real one to a trusted lawyer.
James said, laughing and looking at Ethan. Ethan pulled the real will from his bag, shaking his head in disbelief.
Good thing I brought this. In the first place, he continued, inheritance is based on a legal quota system. It's absurd to give everything to just one person.
What? I suspected something like this might happen. That's why my father recently left a copy of the official will in my office. It's notarized, so it's easy to tell it's genuine.
I listened to Ethan, taken aback. I never knew James had taken such precautions. James really was a reliable husband. If I were alone, I'm sure things would have unfolded just as Liam and Emily planned. And as for Ethan, I was moved to tears at how much he had grown up. Our once young Ethan was now following his father's footsteps as a fine lawyer. As James and Ethan explained, Emily was left speechless, her mouth agape. I thought that Liam and Emily would give up at this point, but she snatched the will from Ethan's hands. Ignoring Ethan's calls for her to stop, she glared at the will, gave a snort of derision, and sneered at us.
Once this is gone, ours becomes the real one.
She shrieked as she began to tear the will into tiny pieces. She shredded the document so thoroughly that even if someone tried to collect and piece together the fragments, it would be a daunting task. Stepping on the bits of paper scattered on the floor, she then turned to us with a triumphant look.
Now there's no other will. Ours is the real one.
Emily's smart move. Now, if we make sure Dad doesn't do anything extra, ours becomes the real one.
Liam chimed in. Both Ethan and James let out long sighs at the pair's childish antics.
You two really think you'll get away with this?
James's deep voice echoed in the room. Liam and Emily smirked, not understanding what was going to happen. Ethan took a step forward and started to explain.
You two are truly fools. Forging a will or tearing it up arbitrarily is a criminal offense.
At his words, the two of them gaped at Ethan, dumbfounded.
What do you mean? A notarized certificate sounds serious, but it's just a piece of paper, right? Why would tearing and throwing it away be a crime?
If you deliberately destroy or forge a will, you could be subject to criminal penalties like fines or imprisonment. Moreover, if you commit a crime, you can lose your right to inheritance.
So, does that mean we won't get a single penny?
That's right. Without doing your due diligence, you've committed a serious crime. Do you understand that? Ethan cradled his head in his hands, shaking it.
Emily's eyes went wide in surprise at his response.
Upon hearing Ethan's explanation, Liam seemed to finally comprehend the gravity of the situation. His face turned pale, and he slumped in defeat.
I didn't know that at all. Please, isn't there something we can do? I don't want to get arrested.
You need to take full responsibility for your actions. You're an adult, aren't you?
I had no choice. I was driven to the edge. Our family has been estranged, and I couldn't even get close to our house. I barely graduated high school, so it's tough finding a full-time job. I've been scraping by on part-time work, and I have debts to pay. I'm at my limit. Emily, with tears in her eyes, clung to Ethan.
Just as she did, Liam clung to James, begging and apologizing. Please, find a way out of this. Please forgive me.
But neither James nor Ethan paid any heed to their pleas.
Seeing their steadfast refusal to budge, both Emily and Liam, sweat beading on their foreheads, were at a loss. It must have dawned on them that they were in a truly dire situation.
In the end, they turned to me.
Please help us convince him, Mom. Dad always listens to you, doesn't he? Ma'am, you heard me, right? I am in a terrible bind. You understand, don't you? You must have gone through something similar. That's why you married a wealthy man like your husband, didn't you?
For a moment, I pondered on what I could say to them. To be honest, what they had planned was inexcusable. No matter how financially strained they were, to abandon their husband in such a callous manner. It was a reality I didn't want to believe, but it had indeed happened.
You both need to deal with the consequences of your actions.
I said,
Hearing these words, Liam and Emily looked devastated, sobbing uncontrollably and whimpering like children in denial.
then they ended up in court because James and Ethan took legal action. It took time, but they were eventually handed criminal sentences. They lost their inheritance rights, so even if James passes away, they won't get a single penny. The two of them are now in prison. The two of them are now living in prison. I doubt I'll ever forgive Liam and Emily for their conspiracy to tarnish our family's reputation. James says they can never set foot in our house again. Despite it all, James and I continue to live a peaceful life together.